They say betrayal comes from where you least expect it. It sneaks up on you like a shadow in the night, silent, unnoticed, until it's too late. But I never thought my own home would be the battleground. I never thought I'd be standing in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized, looking at the pieces of something I could never put back together. You think you know yourself. You think you know what you're capable of. You think you have limits, boundaries, lines you'd never cross. Until one day, you do. And the worst part? Sometimes, you don't even feel sorry. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no sudden, earth-shattering event. It was subtle. A small, quiet shift. The kind you don't notice until you look back and realize that was the moment. The beginning of the end. I wish I could say I was blindsided. I wish I could say I had no idea where it was all heading. I know it's wrong. I know it's dangerous. But the truth? The truth is, I don't even know if I want to stop. It started with loneliness. A loneliness so deep, it felt like a second skin. A kind of loneliness that makes you feel invisible, even when you're surrounded by people. Have you ever felt that? Like you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one would even turn their head? That was my life. My husband? He was there, but he wasn't there. You know what I mean? The kind of presence that feels like an absence. The kind of love that's nothing more than a routine. The kind of relationship where, "How was your day?" is just another way to say, "I have nothing to say to you." I used to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he even saw me anymore. Wondering if he ever thought about the way things used to be. The way we used to be. But the truth is, he didn't. And then there was him. The person I never should have leaned on. The one who saw me when no one else did. Who listened, who cared, who made me feel like I was somebody again. I didn't mean for it to happen. God, I swear, I didn't. But loneliness is a powerful thing. It doesn't just make you crave love, it makes you reckless. I can still hear the way my heart pounded the first time I realized the way I was looking at him wasn't the way I should be. I can still feel the heat rise in my face when I caught myself wanting the attention, the closeness, the connection. And that's when it hit me. I was on a path I couldn't turn back from. Because once you taste something you've been starving for, something you didn't even realize you needed, you can't just pretend it never happened. And the craziest part? A part of me I don't even recognize anymore, was begging for more. And if you love jaw-dropping, emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. I don't know when it truly started. Maybe it had been creeping in for years, like a slow poison I didn't notice until it had already spread through every part of my life. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who had spent more than half her life dedicated to other people. I had a home, a family, a life that looked just fine on the outside. But on the inside? God, on the inside, I was drowning. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being me. I had become a role, a background character in my own story. My husband and I, we weren't unhappy, not exactly. We were just there. Existing side by side like two strangers who happened to share a house, a bed, a name. Our conversations were short, clipped. The kind you have when you feel obligated to speak, but have nothing real to say. Did you pay the water bill? Yeah, I handled it. Don't forget your dentist appointment next week. Okay. That was our love story now. A series of transactional exchanges. A marriage reduced to responsibilities and reminders. At night, I would lie beside him, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the weight of the silence between us. I would close my eyes and try to remember what it felt like when he used to touch me, not just out of habit, but because he wanted to. I would turn toward him, hoping, praying that maybe tonight he would reach for me. But he never did. And then there was my son. My beautiful boy, my greatest accomplishment, the one thing in my life that had ever truly felt like mine. He had always been different. Thoughtful. Observant. While his father moved through life in straight lines, my son saw the curves, the colors, the spaces in between. He noticed things. He noticed me. Mom, you okay? You look tired today. Did you eat? I can make you something. Small things. Little gestures. But when you've been invisible for so long, even the smallest glance can feel like sunlight breaking through a storm. I don't know if he saw it then, the way I lingered on his words longer than I should have. The way my chest ached at the kindness in his voice. The way my loneliness curled itself around his presence, desperate for warmth. I told myself it was normal. After all, he was my son. He was supposed to care. But the truth was, the way he cared for me, it felt like something I had been missing for so long. Something I had stopped believing I deserved. Our home wasn't broken, but it wasn't whole either. It was quiet, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that carried weight, the kind that sat heavy in the air, pressing down on everything. Dinner was the worst. The clinking of forks against plates, the occasional cough, the sound of my husband's phone vibrating on the table. No laughter. No stories about our day. Just the routine of eating together, apart. And my son, he was the only one who ever tried to fill the space between us. "So, how was work, Dad?" he'd ask, his voice full of forced enthusiasm. "Fine." My husband wouldn't even look up from his plate. "Mom, did you ever get that book you wanted?" "Not yet." I'd smile, grateful that he even remembered. Sometimes I caught my son watching me, his brows furrowed like he was trying to figure something out. And I knew. He saw the emptiness in me. And somehow, that scared me more than anything. I wish I could say there was a single moment, a clear turning point where everything shifted. But it wasn't like that. It was a series of small moments. Like the night I sat alone in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching. My husband had gone to bed hours ago. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't even notice I hadn't followed him. And then my son walked in. "Why are you still up?" he asked, sitting beside me. "Couldn't sleep. Want me to stay with you?" And before I could say no, before I could remind myself that I was the mother, that I should be the strong one, I nodded. We sat there for hours. Talking, laughing, existing together in a way I had forgotten was possible. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. That was the moment. Not when I crossed the line, but when I realized how close I was to it. Because the way I felt that night, the warmth, the comfort, the connection, was something I should have been feeling with my husband. But I wasn't. And that thought alone was dangerous enough to unravel everything. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming, that it snuck up on me like an unexpected storm. But the truth? The truth is, I felt the shift before it even happened. It was a slow unraveling, one I let happen, one I wanted to happen. And it all started with a moment, one single moment that should have been innocent. But once something feels different, it is different. It was a family gathering. One of those obligatory events where everyone smiles just enough to keep up appearances, but you can feel the tension beneath it all. Relatives I barely spoke to, conversations that felt more like interviews than catching up, my husband somewhere in the corner, lost in his own world, probably thinking about work even though we were supposed to be off work. I tried. I really did. I wore the dress he once loved, fixed my hair the way I used to when he actually noticed me. But the moment I walked into the room, I knew I could have been anyone. A guest, a stranger, an extra in the background of his life. He barely glanced up. Just a nod, a passing glance, as if I was no different from the furniture in the room. It shouldn't have hurt. But it did. And my son? He saw it. I was quiet that night. I sat at the edge of conversations, smiling when necessary, nodding at the right times, but I wasn't there. And then, in the middle of it all, a plate slipped from my hands. Nothing dramatic, just a small accident. A quiet, meaningless thing. But before I could even bend down to pick it up, he was there. "I got it, Mom." His voice was soft, reassuring. He knelt beside me, picking up the shards, careful not to let me touch the sharp edges. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I opened my mouth to say yes, to laugh it off, to pretend like I always did. But the words didn't come. Because at that moment, with all the noise around us, he was the only person who actually saw me. "I'm fine," I whispered, but my voice wavered. And for a second, just a second, he didn't move. He just looked at me, like he knew. That was the moment. The shift. It was small, innocent. But something about it stuck to me like a whisper I couldn't unhear. Later that night, when the gathering was over, my husband went straight to bed without a word. No good night. No, you looked beautiful tonight. Nothing. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty wine glass in front of me, wondering when I had become this person, someone who existed on the outskirts of her own life. And then I heard his footsteps. "Hey," my son said, leaning against the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You sure you're okay?" I smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be reassuring but felt like a lie. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." He didn't buy it. He walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture that sent warmth through me in a way I didn't expect. "You just seemed, I don't know, off tonight." I exhaled, staring at my reflection in the glass. "I guess I just don't know who I am anymore." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Too raw. Too exposed. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me, like he was trying to figure out how to fix something he didn't know was broken. And then he did something that shattered me. He wrapped his arms around me. It was just a hug. A son hugging his mother. Something we had done 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to sink into the warmth, the comfort, the presence that I had been aching for. And then I felt it, how long I had been standing there, how neither of us moved right away. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't just a hug anymore. It was a moment where I felt held, where I felt wanted. And when I finally pulled away, something inside me had already shifted. I knew, in that moment, I was standing at the edge of something I could never come back from. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, my husband asleep beside me, unaware of the storm inside me. I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about our marriage, our years together, the life we built. I was thinking about a hug, and how, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about my marriage. This wasn't just about loneliness. This was about something deeper, something dangerous. Because when someone makes you feel alive after years of being numb, you don't just walk away from that. And that terrified me. That night, I told myself it was nothing. Just a moment. A slip. A warmth I had been missing, misplaced onto the only person who had shown me care. That's all it was. But if that were true, why couldn't I stop thinking about it? Why did I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shift in a way I couldn't explain? Why did my skin still tingle where his arms had been? I turned my head to look at my husband. He was asleep, his back to me, just like always. No warmth. No connection. Just distance. And that's when the guilt crept in. The heavy, suffocating kind that makes your stomach twist. What is wrong with me? I was his mother. This was my son. I should have felt nothing but maternal love, pure and unwavering. But instead, I felt seen. I felt wanted. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. I turned onto my side, squeezing my eyes shut, forcing myself to push the thoughts away. But no matter how much I tried to bury them, they clawed their way back. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't. It was just attention. I had been invisible for so long, desperate for something, anything, to remind me that I was still here. Still a woman. Still someone worth noticing. That's all this was. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Because if it was just attention, why did my body feel warm at the memory of his touch? The next morning, I told myself I was fine. That today would be normal. That last night was a fleeting moment, and I wouldn't allow it to linger. But I felt different. And I acted different. I spent longer in front of the mirror, fixing my hair, choosing a dress instead of my usual worn-out leggings and oversized sweater. Why? I told myself it was for me. But when I stepped out of my room and saw my son in the kitchen, his eyes flickering up to meet mine, I felt something stir inside me. His gaze lingered for half a second longer than usual. And in that half second, my breath caught in my throat. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice easy, casual, as if nothing had changed. And maybe, for him, nothing had changed. But for me, everything felt different. I started finding reasons to be around him more. Not obvious ones. Nothing that would raise suspicion. But little things. Can you help me move some boxes in the garage? I was going to run some errands. Do you want to come with me? Do you feel like watching a movie tonight? It was innocent. It was just bonding. That's what I told myself. But then I started noticing the way my heart sped up when he entered the room. The way I sat a little closer than I used to. The way I listened more intently when he spoke, drinking in every word like it was something I needed to survive. And the worst part? The way he made me feel young again. Because for the first time in years, someone looked at me, not as a mother, not as a wife, but as a person. A woman with thoughts, emotions, and needs. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It came in small waves. Like when my husband walked past me in the hallway, barely glancing at me, and instead of feeling hurt, I felt relieved, because it meant he wasn't paying attention. Like when I caught myself laughing with my son, a real, deep laugh that I hadn't felt in years, and I realized my husband hadn't made me feel that way in over a decade. Like when I looked forward to seeing my son come home, and I knew that the way I anticipated his presence wasn't right. And yet, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because for the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I was fading. I felt alive. And the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. But I knew, deep down, I was already too far gone. I should have stopped it. I should have recognized the danger before it became something I couldn't control. But how do you stop something that feels so good? How do you pull yourself away from the only thing that makes you feel alive? I don't know if he sensed it or if it was just who he was, always attuned to the emotions in the room, always noticing the small things that no one else did. But my son started paying even closer attention to me. Mom, you've been quiet lately. You seem tired. Are you sleeping okay? I feel like you don't smile as much as you used to. It was the way he said it. Soft, careful, like he genuinely cared. And after years of being overlooked, those words weren't just words. They were a lifeline. He tried harder. Little things at first. Suggesting we go out for coffee. Offering to cook dinner when he saw I was too drained to stand in the kitchen. Checking on me more than usual. And every time he did, I felt myself slipping further. Because I had spent years convincing myself that I was fine. That I didn't need affection. Didn't need to be noticed. But when someone does notice you, when someone reaches into the darkness you've been trapped in and pulls you into the light, how do you not reach back? I started craving our conversations. We would talk for hours. About everything. About nothing. It was different with him. With my husband, conversations were empty, obligatory, a routine exchange of words that carried no weight. But with my son, it was real. Deep. He asked questions no one had asked me in years. Mom, do you ever regret the choices you made? If you could go back and change one thing about your life, what would it be? Do you ever feel like you're meant for more? And I answered, honestly, Raleigh, because he was the only one who actually listened. And when you've been unheard for so long, being heard is intoxicating. It started like any other night. The house was quiet. My husband had gone to bed hours ago. I was in the living room, staring at the flickering glow of the TV, but I wasn't watching. My mind was somewhere else. And then I heard footsteps. Couldn't sleep? He asked, leaning against the doorway. No, I admitted. Me neither. He walked in and sat down beside me. Close, but not too close. But I felt him. I always felt him. The air between us shifted, heavy with something unspoken. For a while, we just sat there, the silence between us louder than any words we could have said. And then he sighed. You know, I worry about you. Why? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Because you don't seem happy, Mom. Something in my chest cracked. Not because of what he said, but because he was right. I wasn't happy. And I didn't remember the last time I had been. I guess I don't know who I am anymore, I confessed. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, watching me, absorbing my words like they meant something. And then, softly, carefully, he reached out. His hand found mine. And for a second, just a second, I let it happen. Because it felt safe. Because it felt good. Because I didn't want to pull away. But when I finally did, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach tighten. Something that told me he felt it too. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. It's late. We should go to bed. He hesitated. Just for a moment. But then he nodded. Yeah. Good night, Mom. Good night. I sat there long after he left. My heart pounding. My skin burning where his fingers had been. And for the first time, I realized. We had crossed a line. It wasn't physical. It wasn't wrong. But it was something. Something dangerous. Something I didn't know how to walk away from. Because the truth was, I didn't want to. I told myself I had it under control. That it was just a passing storm, a momentary lapse in my mind, in my emotions. That I could stop this before it turned into something real. But what I didn't realize, what I refused to accept, was that it had already become real. Not in action. Not in words. But in the way I thought. The way I felt. And when the truth finally hit me, it didn't come gently. It crashed over me like a wave I never saw coming, dragging me under, making me choke on everything I had tried so hard to ignore. It happened when I least expected it. A normal day. A normal evening. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes, lost in thought, thoughts that had become all too familiar. And then I heard his voice. Not directed at me. Not meant for me. But it still hit me. Yeah, she's great. We've been spending a lot of time together. I turned. My son was on the phone, leaning against the counter, a small smile playing on his lips. I knew that smile. I had seen it before. It was the same way he used to look at me, when I was the one he focused on, when I was the one who filled the quiet spaces in his life. No, I haven't told my mom yet. But I think she'll be happy for me. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy, not in the way it should have been. It was loss. A deep, aching loss that made my chest tighten, made my fingers go numb, made my breath catch in my throat. Because suddenly I realized I wasn't his whole world anymore. And worse? I had been selfish enough to want to be. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the truth I had refused to face. He wasn't mine to lean on. He wasn't mine to hold on to. He was my son. And I had let my loneliness twist that into something it was never meant to be. That night I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the thoughts spinning in my head. It had never been about him. It had always been about me. About the emptiness I had ignored for years. The marriage that had withered into something lifeless. The slow erosion of myself, the woman I used to be, the woman I could have been, if only I had chosen to fight for her instead of looking for someone else to fill the void. I had leaned on my son because it was easy. Because he saw me. Because he gave me something my husband hadn't given me in years. But he was never supposed to be that person. And now I had to face the truth. I had let myself fall into something dangerous. And I had to pull myself out before it was too late. I should have been relieved when my husband finally noticed. I should have been grateful that, for the first time in years, he actually looked at me. But when the words left his mouth, they felt like knives pressing against my skin. You've been different lately. I froze. Not because I didn't know what he meant, but because I did. Different how? My voice was too careful, too measured. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know. Distant. Like you're somewhere else all the time. I swallowed hard. I've just had a lot on my mind. Yeah? About what? His tone wasn't accusatory. It wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was genuine. For the first time in a long time, my husband was actually trying to reach me. And the sickest part? I didn't know if I wanted him to. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw what I had refused to acknowledge for so long. It wasn't just him who had stopped trying. It was me. I had been blaming him for our distance. Blaming him for not seeing me, not wanting me, not loving me the way he used to. But the truth? I had stopped loving him too. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not consciously. But in the slow, silent way that love sometimes fades. And I had spent all this time looking for that love somewhere else instead of asking myself the hardest question of all. Do I even want to fix this? And that's when I broke. Right there, in front of him. Not because of my son. Not because of anything he had done. But because I realized that I had been running from something inside myself for so long, I didn't even recognize who I was anymore. I don't know who I am, I whispered. And for the first time in years, my husband didn't look past me. He saw me. Not as the wife he had grown used to. Not as the woman he had stopped noticing. But as someone breaking right in front of him. Then let's figure it out, he said. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that there was still something left to save. But I didn't know if I did. Because the truth was, I had spent so long searching for something outside of my marriage. I wasn't sure I even wanted to go back inside it. I thought realization would bring me clarity. That once I saw the truth, I would know what to do. But all it did was leave me feeling lost. Because knowing something and fixing it are two different things. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to fix anything. The distance I created, I started avoiding him. Not because I wanted to. Not because I stopped caring. But because I didn't trust myself anymore. I couldn't look at him the same way. Couldn't share the same space without feeling the weight of everything I had allowed to happen inside my own mind. So I pulled back. When he walked into the room, I found a reason to walk out. When he tried to talk to me, I kept my answers short, my voice flat. And I told myself it was for the best. That if I created enough distance, the feelings would fade. That if I stopped feeding the fire, it would burn itself out. But I didn't expect him to notice. Mom? His voice was cautious, careful. I kept my back turned, pretending to focus on something, anything, other than the ache in my chest. Are you mad at me? I froze. What? No, of course not. Then what is it? I forced a smile, turned to him, but it felt like a lie. I've just been tired lately. That's all. He studied me, eyes narrowing slightly, the way he always did when he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. You sure? Yes. The word came out too fast. Too forced. And in that moment, I knew he felt it too. The shift. The invisible wall I had placed between us. And the worst part? I saw the hurt in his eyes. Because after all this time, after everything, now I was the one pushing him away. The tension in my marriage had always been there. A quiet, creeping thing that settled into our home like dust, slowly, silently, until one day, you look around and realize everything is covered in it. But now, it wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud. Unspoken words hanging in the air. A stiffness in our interactions that neither of us could ignore. And finally, it snapped. Are we going to talk about this? His voice cut through the silence one evening as I cleared the dinner table. Talk about what? I didn't turn to look at him. You know what? I gripped the plate a little too tightly, feeling the edge of it dig into my palm. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. I exhaled sharply, setting the plate down with more force than necessary. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me what's going on with you. With us. I finally turned to face him, and for the first time in years, we truly looked at each other. And what I saw scared me. Because he looked tired. Not just in the physical way, but in the emotional way. The way people look when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long. You've been different, he said. Distant. Like you don't even want to be here anymore. I opened my mouth to argue. To deny it. But I couldn't. Because he was right. I don't know who I am anymore, I whispered, echoing the same words I had once said to my son. His expression softened, but it was laced with something else too. Fear. Is there someone else? The question hit me like a slap. I should have said no. I wanted to say no. But my hesitation was an answer in itself. Because the truth? There was someone else. Not in the way he thought. Not in the way that could be proven. But emotionally? My heart had already strayed. And I didn't know how to bring it back. I laid awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my husband's steady breathing filling the room. This was it. The moment where I had to decide. Continue down the road I had been walking, the slow, destructive path that had already led me too far. Or stop. Face my emotions. Confront the parts of myself I had ignored for so long. Fix my marriage, or finally let it go. The hardest part? I didn't know what I wanted. Because the problem was never just my husband. The problem was me. And I wasn't sure if I even knew how to fix myself. If you've ever stood at a crossroads, knowing that whatever choice you made would change everything, then you know exactly how this feels. If you don't want to miss what happens next, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because the hardest truths are the ones we tell ourselves. I always thought the hardest part of a mistake was making it. That the moment of weakness, the moment you crossed the line, was where the real damage happened. But I was wrong. The hardest part is what comes after. It's the silence that follows. The weight of your own thoughts pressing against your chest, making it hard to breathe. It's waking up in the same life, in the same house, and realizing you've changed, but no one else knows it yet. It's looking in the mirror and asking yourself a question you don't want to answer. What have I done? I had spent weeks, months, telling myself a story. That my loneliness was my husband's fault. That my emotional emptiness was because of him. That if he had just seen me, if he had just tried harder, I wouldn't have ended up here. But the truth? It wasn't just him. It was me. I had let myself drift. I had let the silence between us grow. I had let resentment take root where love used to be. And instead of fighting for my marriage, I had sought comfort elsewhere. I told myself it was never about my son. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? Because it wasn't him, not in the way I had feared. It was the way he made me feel. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't desire. It wasn't anything I had let my mind twist it into. It was recognition. I wanted to feel like I mattered. I wanted to feel seen. And when I looked back, really looked back, I realized that was all I had been chasing. Not an affair. Not a forbidden love. But a version of myself I had lost. A woman who felt worthy. A woman who felt wanted. A woman who didn't feel like a ghost in her own life. That was the real betrayal. Not of my marriage. Not of my husband. But of myself. I had almost ruined my family, not because of something physical, but because I let my own emptiness consume me. Because I had been so desperate to feel something again, that I didn't stop to ask if I was looking for it in the wrong place. The worst part wasn't my guilt. It wasn't even the fear of what would happen if my husband found out how far my mind had gone. It was the look in my son's eyes when he noticed the distance I had placed between us. The way he hesitated before speaking to me. The way he stopped checking in, stopped sitting too close, stopped asking if I was okay. He had felt it too. The shift. The change. And now I had pulled away so forcefully that I had left a wound where there was once something safe. Had I made him question things too? Had I damaged something that was never meant to be broken? Had my own loneliness seeped into places it never should have touched? I felt sick. Because it wasn't just my marriage I had put at risk. It was the one relationship that should have never been tainted by my pain. And I didn't know how to fix that. I had two choices. I could keep pretending. Keep pushing my husband away, keep burying my guilt, keep letting the past dictate my future. Or I could fight. Not for him. Not even for my son. But for myself. For the woman I used to be. For the woman I still could be. Because if I didn't, if I let this moment define me, if I let my guilt consume me, I would lose more than just my marriage. I would lose myself. And I couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not this time. Loneliness is dangerous. It sneaks up on you, whispers lies into your ear, makes you see things that aren't real. It turns a lack of attention into something deeper. It turns a simple touch into something intoxicating. It makes you believe that what you're craving is love. When really, it's just connection. I know that now. But the damage had already been done. I had let my own emptiness guide me down a path I was never meant to walk. I had blurred the lines between comfort and desire, between family and something else, something I never should have let exist in my mind. And the scariest part? It happened so easily. So quietly. One small step at a time. Because betrayal doesn't always come from an affair. Sometimes, it starts in your heart before it ever reaches your body. Maybe you've never been in my exact position. Maybe your story isn't the same as mine. But if you've ever felt invisible, If you've ever reached for something or someone to fill a void you didn't even know was there. If you've ever questioned your own emotions, your own intentions, your own sanity, then you know exactly how this feels. And I want to hear from you. Because these aren't things we talk about. These aren't confessions we admit to. But they're real. They happen. So tell me, have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of something dangerous? Have you ever realized too late that you were chasing the wrong thing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And if this one resonated with you, even in the smallest way, hit that like button. Because stories like this, they aren't just mine. They belong to so many of us. And we need to talk about them. So if you don't want to miss what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because sometimes, the most shocking betrayals are the ones we never saw coming. Looking back, I realize now that the real betrayal wasn't what I almost did. It was what I almost became. A woman who let her emotions spiral out of control. A woman who let loneliness convince her that she needed something she was never meant to have. A woman who almost sacrificed everything, not for love, not for passion, but for recognition. Because that's the real danger, isn't it? Not the physical affair. Not the moment two people cross a line they can never uncross. But the before. The stolen glances. The lingering thoughts. The justifications. The slow unraveling of boundaries. The tiny steps that don't feel like anything until one day, you look back and realize you've already gone too far. So let this be a warning. Not just to myself, but to anyone listening. Guard your heart. Because sometimes the lines blur so slowly, so quietly, that you don't even notice when you've crossed them. Until it's too late. And just when I thought I had finally figured out how to put the pieces back together, something happened that changed everything. But that's a story for another day. So make sure you subscribe. Because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.